It was still dark when Evelyn Monroe opened her eyes. Not from an alarm clock, she hadn't owned one in years, but from the old pipes above her head that clanked every morning at 4:27. Her room was barely larger than a storage closet, tucked behind a bakery in the Bishop Arts district of Dallas. The walls were bare except for a single nail where she hung her apron. A tiny window offered a blurry view of the alley dumpsters. The air always smelled faintly of yeast and old grease, but she'd grown used to it. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, her feet touching the cold tile floor. Her hands moved automatically, wrapping her dark hair in a bun, slipping into worn jeans and a long-sleeved shirt faded from the sun. Everything about her was routine, habit, safe. She liked it that way. Outside, the city was still sleeping. The streets were wet from the night's rain, glistening under the amber glow of the streetlights. Evelyn pushed her flower cart out of the alley, the old metal wheels squeaking as she turned onto West Davis Street. From there, it was a 30-minute walk to her corner, Lemon Avenue and Oak Lawn, where she'd stand until sundown. Her cart was patched together from different pieces of metal and wood, the paint peeling, the wheels uneven. But it was hers. On top, plastic buckets held the day's flowers: white daisies, yellow chrysanthemums, a few roses with bruised petals she had gotten at a discount. She arranged them carefully, always in the same order: daisies in the middle, mums to the sides, roses in the back. There was no science to it, but it mattered to her. Maybe because it was the only thing she could control. By the time she reached the intersection, the first signs of daylight had started to appear. Cars rolled by slowly. Pedestrians began to trickle in, nurses getting off the night shift, lawyers in early meetings, joggers with wireless earbuds and expensive sneakers. No one looked at her. They rarely did. She had been there for 5 years. Always the same spot. Always the same quiet presence. People knew her in the way they knew the guy who sold peanuts at the next block, or the man who waved a Bible on the corner every Saturday. She wasn't part of their lives, just part of the background. But that anonymity, once comforting, had started to feel like something else lately. Something hollow. She didn't remember exactly when the feeling started. Maybe it was that afternoon last winter when a little girl with tangled hair stared at her through a car window, her eyes wide and unblinking. Or maybe it was the night she dreamed of an old staircase she didn't recognize, yet somehow felt familiar. Either way, something was shifting. After setting up her flowers, Evelyn leaned against the pole of the streetlight and watched the city breathe itself awake. She was invisible here, and most days, that was a blessing. She could watch without being watched. She could feel without having to explain. But today felt different. She didn't know why. She reached into the pocket of her coat and touched something she always carried with her: a tiny bronze key. It had no teeth, no obvious use. The metal was smooth from years of handling. Along with it, hidden deeper inside her bag, was a small cloth pouch containing a lock of light brown hair, tied with a faded pink ribbon. She had no idea why she kept them. She only knew she'd had them since she was 8. That was the year she'd arrived in Abilene, barefoot and silent, holding a piece of paper with her name written in shaky handwriting: Evelyn Monroe. No one ever told her who had left her there. No one ever came back for her. The family that took her in wasn't cruel, just indifferent. They let her sleep in a laundry room. They didn't ask questions. They didn't want answers. She was 13 when she started cleaning houses for money. 18 when she left. Alone. Free, technically. But nowhere near whole. She had come to Dallas with $56 and a second-hand backpack. The bakery owner let her stay in the storage room in exchange for cleaning on weekends. The cart she found behind a mechanic's shop, abandoned. Everything else, she'd scraped together. And now, here she was, 28 years old, a street florist in a city that didn't know her name. "Morning," mumbled a man in a suit as he passed by, glancing briefly at the flowers. She nodded, offering a half-smile. He didn't stop. That was how it always went. But today was different. The air was thicker, the light harsher, the memories sharper. A woman crossed the street, paused by the cart, and picked up a bouquet of daisies. Her perfume, something floral, expensive, made Evelyn's stomach twist. "These are lovely," the woman said. "You made them yourself?" Evelyn shook her head. "Just arranged them." The woman studied her face. "You know, you remind me of someone." Evelyn's breath caught for just a moment. "Do I?" The woman narrowed her eyes, as if searching her memory, then smiled faintly. "Maybe not. Have a good day." She walked off. Evelyn watched her go, her heartbeat suddenly too loud. She didn't recognize the woman, but something about her voice, the perfume, the look in her eyes, it stirred something. After she packed up that evening, Evelyn returned to her room and sat on the floor, the blue cardboard box open in front of her. The key, the lock of hair. She held them in her hands, stared at them for a long time. A sudden thought came to her, strange, vivid, uninvited. A garden, a hallway with wooden floors, the smell of gardenias, someone singing. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. She sat in the dark for a long time, until the bakery's oven clicked on and the smell of rising dough filled the walls again. Evelyn had no idea that within days, the fragile reality she had built for herself would begin to fall apart. That her name, which meant nothing to anyone for decades, would suddenly carry weight. That a man she had never met would scream for help in the middle of the street, and that her response would ignite the fuse of a truth buried so deep it had nearly disappeared. But tonight, she was still invisible. And tomorrow, the world would start to remember her. If you like interesting stories, leave your like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all our content. And let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. We'd love to hear from you. Some mornings hit differently. Evelyn couldn't explain why, but as she opened her eyes that day, a heaviness settled in her chest before her feet touched the floor. It was a quiet weight, not panic, not sadness, just an ache that had no name. She sat still on the bed for several minutes, staring at the small window where light was just beginning to break through. She felt it before she understood it. A memory was waking up. It started as a scent, soft, distant, almost imaginary. Gardenias. So vivid she could almost feel the petals brushing her face. She shook her head, as if that could erase it. But the feeling stayed. She moved through her routine in silence, brushed her teeth in the bakery's tiny sink, tied her apron around her waist, and grabbed a piece of day-old bread left out for her by Mr. Alvarez, the baker. She didn't say thank you anymore. He'd stopped expecting it. Their arrangement was unspoken and practical. On her way to the corner that morning, her mind drifted back to a hallway. Wooden floors, a patterned rug, sunlight pouring in from high windows. She didn't recognize the space, yet something inside her said she had once walked barefoot there. As a child, as someone safe. The images came in flashes, too fast, too broken to make sense. A staircase, a woman's voice humming a lullaby, a cool breeze through lace curtains, and then nothing. By the time she reached her usual corner, her hands were trembling. She tried to focus on her flowers. Daisies first, then chrysanthemums. Yellow, white, pink. Keep the hands busy, Evelyn. That's what she always told herself. But her mind wouldn't settle. She opened her satchel and pulled out the small blue cardboard box, the one she hadn't touched in months. Inside were the only two objects that had ever truly belonged to her. First, the lock of hair. Light brown, soft, tied with a delicate pink ribbon that had lost its color long ago. She had stared at it countless times, wondering whose it was, wondering if it had once belonged to someone who loved her. Then, the key. Bronze, small, with no grooves or marks. It didn't belong to any lock she'd ever seen. She had shown it once, years ago, to a locksmith who laughed and said it was probably ornamental. But she didn't believe that. Deep down, she felt it belonged to something real. Something lost. She had no photos, no baby clothes, not even a birth certificate. Just that box and the word Monroe, handwritten in pencil on the corner of a faded envelope she had clung to for years. It was the only name she had when she arrived in Abilene, Texas, at 8 years old. The woman who picked her up at the county office was named Teresa. Not a social worker, just someone who did favors for the system back then. Evelyn was taken to a trailer on the outskirts of town, where a couple let her sleep on a pull-out sofa and treated her like a guest who had overstayed her welcome from day one. They never hit her, never starved her. But they didn't talk to her either. Didn't ask her about where she came from or what she needed. It was as if her past had been deleted the moment she walked through their door. She went to public school under the name Evelyn M. Nobody ever asked what the M stood for. When she turned 16, she started cleaning houses after school. At 18, she packed her things, 2 shirts, 1 pair of shoes, and the blue box, and left in the middle of the night. She left a note that simply said, "Thank you," and never looked back. In Dallas, she tried to build something from scratch. But memories had a way of finding her when she least expected it. A church bell ringing, a certain brand of soap, the sound of wind through trees. They all carried pieces of something unfinished, something buried. That morning, while selling her flowers, a man in a tan trench coat dropped a coin into her jar without taking a bouquet. She barely noticed him. Her eyes were distant, stuck somewhere between the smell of gardenias and the image of a woman in a white blouse sitting by a window. Who was she? Why did Evelyn know the sound of her voice without knowing her name? It was only noon, but the sun was too hot. She pushed her cart a little farther into the shade, then sat on the curb, clutching the box on her lap. She opened it again, hoping that this time, this exact moment, something would click. Some kind of recognition, some kind of truth. Nothing. She hated the feeling of almost remembering. It was worse than forgetting. By the end of the day, her flowers were mostly gone. The last bouquet of chrysanthemums sat in a bucket, wilting. As she packed up, she glanced across the street and saw the woman from the day before. The one who said she looked familiar. The woman was getting into a black sedan. For a split second, their eyes met. Evelyn froze. A chill ran down her spine, not from fear, but from something else. Something ancient and instinctual. Recognition. Not of the woman, exactly, but of a time, a place, a life. She didn't sleep that night. She lay awake on the thin mattress in her room, the key pressed tight in her hand, the scent of gardenias now stronger in her memory than it had ever been before. Something was coming. She could feel it. Not just memory, but truth. And when it arrived, it would not be gentle. The heat had already started to settle over the streets of Dallas, even though it was still early. August in Texas was ruthless. Evelyn wiped sweat from her brow as she watered the flowers on her cart, pouring just enough over each bouquet to keep them alive under the brutal sun. Her hands moved out of habit, but her mind was elsewhere. That morning, she had woken up gasping. The dream had been so vivid, she could still hear the voice, soft, trembling, calling her name from somewhere far away. Not Evelyn, just a name that felt older. Maybe a nickname. She couldn't remember exactly, but it made her feel small again, like she was 6 years old and hiding under a blanket, waiting for someone to come home. She tried to shake it off. The city around her buzzed as it always did. Car horns, distant sirens, conversations between strangers that blurred into white noise. Her corner, lemon and oak lawn, was already alive with movement. She bent down to adjust the umbrella on her cart when it happened. A sharp, unnatural sound tore through the noise of the city, a screech of tires, followed by a metallic slam and a guttural cry. She looked up. Across the intersection, a black SUV had stopped abruptly in front of a construction site. The driver's side door was open, hanging wide. In front of it, 2 men in black hoodies and masks were struggling to shove a man in a suit into the back seat of the vehicle. One of them shouted, cursing as the man fought back, elbows flying, legs kicking. No one moved. The people around her were frozen, staring, unsure if it was a prank, a robbery, or something worse. A woman gasped. A man pulled out his phone to film. Another ducked behind a bench. But Evelyn, she moved. She didn't think. Her feet were already off the sidewalk before her brain caught up. A metal bucket was still in her hand from watering the flowers. She gripped it tight and sprinted across the street, her heart hammering in her chest. As she reached the SUV, one of the masked men turned toward her, just in time for the bucket of water to smash across his face. "Hey!" Evelyn shouted, voice loud and clear. "Let him go." The moment was chaos. Startled, the man stumbled back, cursing. The other turned his attention away from the victim, giving him just enough space to break free and collapse onto the sidewalk. From the building under construction, 2 security guards came running, shouting into their radios. The masked men didn't wait. They bolted. One jumped into the SUV and peeled away, tires screeching against the pavement. The other disappeared down an alley, chased by one of the guards. Evelyn stood in the middle of the street, breathing hard, still holding the empty bucket. The man in the suit was on his knees, shaking, blood dripping from his lip. His tie was torn, his jacket ripped. He looked up at her with wide eyes, confused, alert, and for a strange second, something else. Recognition. Their eyes locked. She took a step toward him. "You okay?" she asked, her voice softer now. He nodded slowly, then shook his head, trying to stand. "Yeah, I think so. You saved me." "I didn't do anything," she replied quickly, already stepping back. Her heart was still racing, and now the adrenaline was starting to crash. Her hands were shaking. One of the security guards approached, speaking into his walkie-talkie, and knelt beside the man. "Mr. Whitmore, are you hurt?" "We called 911. Whitmore. The name hit her like a punch in the chest. She'd heard it before, on billboards, on the news, whispered on the street. Noah Whitmore, one of the most powerful names in Texas real estate. His family's developments stretched across the entire state. Mansions in Highland Park, towers downtown, resorts in Austin. His face had been on magazine covers, and his last name was synonymous with money and power. And now he was looking at her like she was a puzzle he'd seen before. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice raspy. Evelyn hesitated. Evelyn Monroe." He blinked, then stood up slowly with the help of one of the guards. "Monroe. The name hung in the air between them. For a brief second, everything around her disappeared. The noise, the street, the heat, and it was just his eyes staring into hers, something unreadable moving behind them. The paramedics arrived minutes later. Police followed. The questions began. Evelyn gave her statement simply. She saw something wrong and acted on instinct. Noah didn't leave in the ambulance. He refused it. Instead, he sat in the back of a black sedan, an ice pack pressed to his face, watching Evelyn as she packed up her flowers in silence. Before he left, a man in a suit approached her with a folded piece of paper. "From Mr. Whitmore," the man said, handing it to her. "He'd like to speak with you." Evelyn opened the note only after she returned to her small room behind the bakery. It was handwritten, brief, but it stopped her cold. "There's something about you I can't shake. Your name, your face. Please meet me. I think you may be part of something I thought I'd lost forever." No signature, just a phone number. Evelyn sat down on the edge of her bed, the note trembling in her hand. Outside, Dallas buzzed like any other summer night. But for her, the city had changed. Her life had taken a turn she couldn't reverse. And the name she carried, Monroe, was no longer just a mystery she had buried long ago. Someone else remembered it, and he might hold the key to everything. Evelyn stood in front of the mirror in the bakery's small staff restroom, clutching the note so tightly that the paper had creases etched deep into it. She'd read it more than 20 times, the words replaying in her mind like a broken record. "There's something about you I can't shake. Your name, your face." It was signed with nothing but a number, scribbled in clean handwriting that somehow made her nervous. Noah Whitmore hadn't written much, but the weight of his words settled in her chest like stone. She hadn't called. Not that night. Not the next morning. She had no idea why a man like him, a billionaire, a public figure, someone whose face was printed on the covers of Forbes and Business Insider, would want anything to do with her. It made no sense. She was just a florist with no past, no family, no story worth telling. And yet, there had been something in his expression when he heard her name, a flicker of something deeper than confusion. It wasn't random curiosity. It was recognition. That scared her. On the third day, she gave in. She borrowed Mr. Alvarez's old flip phone, the one he kept for emergencies, and dialed the number, her fingers trembling so hard she nearly dropped the device. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Hello." A man's voice, calm but alert. It was him. She hesitated, her mouth dry. "It's Evelyn. Evelyn Monroe." A pause. Then, "Thank you for calling." She waited. "I'd like to meet you," Noah said. "Someplace quiet. Somewhere you feel safe." Evelyn took a long breath. Her safe places were limited, but she thought of a small diner in Oak Cliff, where she sometimes had coffee and listened to old music from the jukebox. She gave him the name and the time. He didn't question it. That night, she sat at a booth by the window, wearing the same jeans and button-up shirt she always wore to work, her hair still tied back. She hadn't put on makeup. She didn't know how to pretend to be someone else. Not anymore. He arrived exactly on time. No suit. No entourage. Just dark jeans, a plain white shirt, and a tired face with a faint cut on his lip. He looked like someone who'd been pulled out of one world and thrown into another. They sat across from each other in silence for several seconds. She avoided eye contact. He didn't. "Thank you," he said again, "for what you did that day. You didn't hesitate." "I didn't think," she replied. "I just saw someone in trouble." He nodded. "Still, you saved my life." Evelyn looked down at the chipped formica table, her hands clasped tightly together. She wanted to ask him why he wanted to meet, what this was about, but she didn't have to. "I asked around," Noah said, his voice low. "Tried to find out who you were. There's no record of you before you turned 18. "I know," she murmured. "There's nothing to find. Your name, Monroe. It meant something to me. It took me a few days to figure out why." She looked up slowly. "My father," he said, "used to have a business partner named Daniel Monroe. I was just a kid, but I remember him. He used to visit our home. He had a daughter." Evelyn felt her heart seize in her chest. "They had a house near Highland Park," he continued. "Big, with a garden. Gardenias. I remember the smell." Her breath hitched. She hadn't told him that. She never told anyone that. Noah studied her. "You don't remember, do you?" "Pieces," she whispered. "Dreams. Smells. A voice. A key I don't know what opens." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "What if I told you I think you used to live in that house?" Evelyn stared at him. She wanted to laugh, but her body wouldn't let her. "I can take you there," Noah said. "The house still exists. It's been empty for years, but I have access to it." She shook her head slowly. "Why would you do that?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe because I owe you. Maybe because ever since I saw your face, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it." He paused, then added, more quietly, "Maybe because something about all this feels like fate." That word made her flinch. Fate wasn't a luxury she believed in. Fate hadn't protected her at 8 years old. It hadn't helped her when she went hungry, when no one cared enough to ask where she came from. But now she couldn't ignore what she felt. Something was pulling her toward that house. Something she didn't understand. She said nothing for a long time. Then finally, she nodded. "Okay." Noah exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath the whole time. "Tomorrow, then, I'll send a car. Just you and me." Evelyn hesitated one more time before replying, "Okay." As she stepped out of the diner and into the warm Dallas night, the wind blew gently across her face, carrying with it a strange sense of familiarity. She didn't know it yet, but stepping into that car the next day would be like opening a door that had been locked for 20 years. A door that had been waiting for her. The car pulled up in front of a tall iron gate surrounded by thick trees and trimmed hedges. It was the kind of property Evelyn had only seen in magazines. Secluded, massive, like it had been pulled from another time and placed right in the middle of Highland Park. The guard at the gate waved them through without a word. Noah didn't speak either. He sat in the seat beside her, unusually quiet, his fingers tapping rhythmically on his knee. As they approached the house, Evelyn's chest tightened. She hadn't seen it yet, not completely, but something inside her was already stirring. The driveway curved around a circular fountain, dry now, with moss creeping along the stone edges. The house was pale sandstone, 3 stories high, with ivy crawling up one of the walls and tall windows framed in dark wood. The roof was slate. The air smelled of heat and soil, but underneath that, something else. Gardenias. Her stomach turned. She hadn't told Noah about that scent. Not exactly, but he had mentioned it. And now here it was, real, thick in the air like a memory come to life. She stepped out of the car slowly, her feet moving without her permission. The stone beneath her shoes felt oddly familiar. The sound of gravel, the curve of the front steps, the color of the door, they weren't just new sights. They were old ones, lost ones. "I don't come here often," Noah said, breaking the silence. "The property's been in a trust since I was a kid. No one's touched it in years." "Why?" Evelyn asked, her voice low. He looked at the house. "Because after Daniel Monroe died, no one wanted to talk about this place." The name hit her harder than she expected. She felt dizzy, but she didn't say anything. Noah unlocked the front door with a large iron key and pushed it open. The smell hit her first. Wood polish, dust, something floral buried deep in the walls. Then came the silence. The kind that wasn't just quiet but heavy, like the house was holding its breath. The foyer was wide, with a grand staircase at the back and a chandelier above that swayed ever so slightly, as if someone had just walked under it. Her feet moved across the tiled floor as if drawn by something invisible. Her fingers skimmed the walls. She wasn't just visiting. She was remembering. They passed through the living room, massive, with leather furniture covered in white sheets and old portraits hanging crookedly on the walls. The kitchen still had copper pans hanging from hooks. The dining room table was long, dusty, but set with crystal glasses, like someone had once prepared it for a celebration that never happened. "Come with me," Noah said softly. He led her through a hallway lined with family photos. Most were faded, the faces hard to make out. But one frame stopped her. A man, mid-30s, with warm eyes and a gentle smile. He stood beside a woman in a white dress, holding a little girl whose face was mostly turned away. She didn't breathe. Her fingers traced the glass. Noah looked over her shoulder. "That's Daniel Monroe, with his wife, Helena, and their daughter." Evelyn's lips moved, barely forming the words. "That little girl." Noah turned to her. "I think it's you." She didn't respond. Her body felt like it was floating above itself, like she was standing in her own ghost's shadow. They moved on. He opened a set of double doors into a library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined with books, a thick rug underfoot, and a large desk that faced the windows. Noah walked behind the desk and opened a drawer. From inside, he pulled out an old folder, yellowed and brittle. He laid it gently on the table and opened it to a page covered in typed text, signed at the bottom. "It's a patent," he said, "filed by Daniel Monroe, co-signed by my father. It was the foundation of our company. Everything we built started with this." Evelyn stepped forward, staring at the signature. Her breath caught. That handwriting. She had seen it before. On the envelope that came with her box. On an old postcard she used to stare at before it disintegrated in the rain when she was 9. "This is my father," she whispered. "This. Daniel Monroe. He's my father." Noah watched her carefully. "You're sure?" She nodded slowly. "I don't know how I know. I feel it." There was silence between them. Evelyn backed away from the desk, her mind reeling. Everything was shifting too fast. For years, she'd believed she was no one, a lost girl with no past. But now, standing here, in a place that felt both foreign and familiar, she felt pieces of herself sliding into place. She turned to the window. Outside, the garden was overgrown but intact. A stone pathway, an old iron bench, a large oak tree. And near it, her eyes locked on a statue. Small, marble, weathered by time. But there, carved into the base of the stone, were the letters, EVELYN. She gasped. Her legs gave out, and she grabbed the edge of the window to steady herself. It wasn't just a coincidence. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't fantasy. She had lived here. She had been loved here. But something had ripped her from this place and buried her past like it never existed. And now, it was starting to claw its way back. It was nearly dusk by the time Evelyn stepped into the garden. She didn't speak, and Noah didn't try to interrupt her silence. He stayed by the glass doors, watching her from a distance, as if he sensed that this exact moment, wasn't his to share. The air was warmer than earlier, but there was a breeze now. It carried the faint scent of the gardenias that had overgrown their planter beds, crawling up fences and around stone walls like ghosts that had never left. Evelyn walked slowly, her hand trailing along the top of the hedges. Her footsteps were uncertain, but her instincts were sharp. She didn't need directions. Her body remembered what her mind had not. Past the rusted bench and the cracked stone path, she came to a small clearing beneath the oak tree. There, suspended by 2 aging ropes, was a wooden swing. The seat was chipped and worn, the ropes frayed at the edges. Evelyn stared at it for a long time, not moving. Then she touched it. It swung gently under her fingers, creaking, and just like that, the memories broke loose. She heard laughter, a little girl's laughter. Hers. She saw a woman, her mother, standing on the porch steps, waving, holding a glass of lemonade. She remembered the weight of the summer sun, the way the grass itched her legs, the sound of the ice clinking in the glass. And then another sound, a man's voice calling her name from inside the house. Evelyn. Warm, deep, safe. Her knees buckled and she sat down on the grass, breathing in shallow gasps as the wave of memory rushed over her. It was so vivid she felt as if she were living it again. She remembered painting rocks with her mother near the bench, a butterfly landing on her arm, her father teaching her how to balance on the edge of the fountain, a house full of light, a home. But the warmth didn't last. The next wave hit harder. The house darkened. The music stopped. She was standing at the top of the staircase, small, scared. Someone was shouting downstairs. A man's voice, sharp. Not her father. A stranger. Then a fall. She felt the motion again, the sensation of falling, her little hands reaching for the rail. The sickening weightlessness. She gasped and grabbed the grass, anchoring herself to the present. Noah moved toward her instinctively, but stopped when she held up a hand. Not yet. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She looked up at the statue by the swing, the one with her name. Her fingers brushed the engraved letters again, and a new image surfaced. A birthday. Balloons. A cake. Her mother holding her in her arms. And then, gone. Just like that. As if someone had cut the film mid-reel. Back inside the house, Evelyn explored quietly while Noah watched from a respectful distance. She moved through each room like a ghost retracing her own footprints. The study. The hallway with floral wallpaper. A small room at the end of the corridor with pale yellow walls and a mobile still hanging from the ceiling. She stepped inside and froze. This was her room. She felt it deep in her bones. The crib was gone. The dresser was empty. But the walls still held faint traces of painted stars, barely visible through time and age. In the corner, a shelf with a single dusty figurine, a porcelain butterfly. She picked it up, and as she did, her hands trembled. A word came to her lips without her understanding why. Helena. Her mother. She remembered now. The soft curls of her hair, the warmth of her hugs, the way she sang quietly while brushing Evelyn's hair. She sat down on the edge of the room's window seat and looked out. The oak tree, the swing, the garden. This was her world once. A perfect world. And then it ended. Suddenly. Cruelly. She didn't remember how it happened. Not exactly. Only fragments. The man shouting. The fall. A door slamming. And then, a long ride in the back of a car. She was crying. Someone telling her to be quiet. Hands not her mother's. A motel room. The smell of cigarettes. She shook her head, trying to keep herself from spiraling again. She had come so far, and now the truth was teasing her, close enough to taste, but still hidden in the shadows. When she came back downstairs, Noah was waiting in the foyer. He looked at her differently now, not with pity, but with something else. Respect. Maybe awe. "I think this was your home," he said, almost like an apology. "I think you were taken from here." Evelyn nodded slowly. "I remember enough now to believe it." She looked back at the stairs. The chandelier swayed gently again, as if some invisible presence had passed through. "There's more, isn't there?" she asked. "More to this story?" Noah hesitated, then spoke carefully. "My father and Daniel Monroe were partners. But not just in business. They were close. My father never talked much about what happened after Daniel died. It was sudden. An accident, supposedly. But I overheard things. Arguments. Money. Pressure. What kind of accident?" Evelyn asked. "He died in a car crash, 2 days after he sold his share of the company." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "And my mother?" Noah was silent for a moment. "She disappeared. Just like that. No trace. No search. No investigation." Evelyn clenched her jaw. "So they erased her," she said quietly. "Just like they erased me." The house around them groaned softly, as if it, too, was remembering. Noah looked at her, his voice more firm now. "If you want answers, we'll find them. I promise you." Evelyn didn't answer. She turned and looked back at the library, the hall, the staircase. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "I don't want just answers. I want the truth." If you're enjoying this story, leave your like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all our content. The attic door groaned as it opened, resisting as if it had spent years trying to forget the weight of what lay behind it. Dust billowed into the hallway as Noah pulled the cord, revealing a narrow, creaking ladder that led into the darkness above the second floor. Evelyn stood silently at the bottom, her arms crossed over her chest, staring at the opening like it might swallow her whole. "I haven't been up there in years," Noah said, glancing down at her. "Not since I was a kid. But my father used to say Daniel Monroe kept everything. Notes, records, letters. He was meticulous." Evelyn didn't speak. Her eyes were focused, sharp now. The fear had settled into a quiet fire inside her. She climbed first. Each step creaked beneath her weight. The air grew heavier with every rung. By the time she reached the top, it felt like she had crossed into another world, one sealed off from time. The attic stretched out in a triangle of shadow and quiet. Wooden beams above. Old furniture covered in canvas. Boxes stacked from floor to ceiling. It smelled of paper, cedar, and age. Noah came up behind her, shining a flashlight across the room. The beams swept over trunks, broken picture frames, stacks of yellowing newspapers. Then, finally, onto a row of sealed boxes labeled in faded black marker. Monroe. Private. Evelyn walked toward them slowly. There were at least 8 boxes, maybe more. She ran her fingers over one of the lids before opening it. Inside, a chaos of old documents, some typed, some handwritten. Receipts, blueprints, letters, and in the center, a leather-bound notebook, worn and cracked at the edges. She picked it up carefully. The first page was dated September 1999, in sharp, tidy script. "If something happens to me, protect Evelyn." She stopped breathing. Noah stepped closer, reading over her shoulder. Daniel Monroe had written the journal in the final months before his death. Each entry was more frantic than the last. He talked about pressure from investors, legal threats, long meetings behind closed doors, fights with people he once trusted, including Noah's father. Most alarming were the names he mentioned, and one, in particular, came up again and again. Frederick Pierce. Evelyn didn't recognize it. Noah, however, did. He was a district attorney, big name, politically connected. Retired now, I think. Evelyn kept flipping through the journal. October 4th, 1999. "They want my shares. I won't sell. They're using threats now. Helena is scared. Evelyn cried last night, and I couldn't explain why I was angry. I have to protect them. I have to find a way out." October 11th. "I gave in. Signed the papers. They wore me down. Helena is furious. She says I betrayed everything we built. But if I didn't, they would have hurt her. I know they would." Evelyn's hands shook. These weren't just journal entries. They were confessions, pieces of a life that had been shattered deliberately. She reached into another box and found an envelope. Inside, photographs. One showed her as a toddler, sitting on her father's lap in front of the library fireplace. Another showed her mother, Helena, at a protest, holding a sign Evelyn couldn't fully read. And then a final one. Helena, alone, standing in front of a hospital. The name on the building was partially torn off, but one word remained. Psychiatric. Evelyn stared at the photo, bile rising in her throat. She didn't know how or why, but she knew what it meant. Her mother had been locked away, and she hadn't gone willingly. She turned to Noah, her voice barely holding steady. "They separated us. After my father died, they wanted control. So they took her, and gave me away." Noah nodded slowly. "It fits the timeline. Your father died. My dad took over the company. Then everything about your family just disappeared." Evelyn dropped into an old chair, holding the photograph of her mother. The same woman she had dreamed about for years. The one whose voice still echoed in her head at night. Now, suddenly, she was real again, and she'd been silenced. "How did I end up in Abilene?" Evelyn asked, more to herself than to Noah. Who decided that? She went back to the journal. The final pages were the most erratic. Daniel's handwriting was rushed, panicked. "They said I'd never see Evelyn again if I spoke out. Helena is watching them now. She knows. She says she'll fight. She says they'll never get away with this. I'm being followed. If they find this notebook, it's over." And then, abruptly, "I'm meeting Frederick tonight. Helena doesn't know. Maybe I can end this quietly." That was the last entry. Noah sat beside her now, quiet. The weight of what they had uncovered was heavy on both of them. "Your mother," he said gently, "might still be alive." Evelyn's head turned slowly. It hadn't occurred to her. But now that he said it, that hospital, the photo, the silence, it was possible. She clutched the journal to her chest, her voice trembling but sure. "Then I have to find her." She looked around the attic one last time. These were not just remnants of her past. They were weapons now. Proof. Fuel for the fire that had just started burning inside her. This wasn't about being forgotten anymore. It was about being stolen, and she was done staying silent. It took Noah less than 48 hours to find out where Frederick Pierce was living. The man had retired nearly a decade earlier, slipping quietly out of the public eye after a long career as a state prosecutor, one built on tough sentencing, headline-making cases, and an untouchable reputation. His current address was in Austin, tucked behind the gates of a private golf community surrounded by lakes and thick, whispering trees. Evelyn didn't wait. She was done waiting. She took the bus, refused Noah's offer to fly or send a driver. She wanted to do this alone. She needed to. This wasn't about power or appearances. It was about facing a man who had helped erase her life. She sat by the window for the full 4-hour ride, holding Daniel Monroe's journal tight to her chest, her fingers gripping the strap of the satchel until her knuckles were white. She had read it again and again. Every word, every date, every frantic sentence her father had written before he died. Each time, the rage inside her grew colder, more focused. She wasn't just looking for answers now. She wanted accountability, justice. That night, in a modest hotel room off I-35, Evelyn stared into the mirror and didn't recognize the woman looking back. Not the florist, not the orphan. Someone else. Someone awake. She dressed simply, black pants, a dark blouse. She pulled her hair into a clean bun and applied a light touch of lipstick, not for vanity, but control. She looked prepared. She needed to. With a forged name and a fake backstory, she made a reservation the next day at a high-end restaurant inside the gated community. Pierce often dined there, according to a waitress Noah had paid for information. He came in every Friday at 1 o'clock sharp, always alone, always in the same booth. Evelyn arrived early. She ordered a coffee she didn't drink, and waited. At 1:13, he walked in, tall, silver-haired, tanned, still wearing that air of authority that made people move out of his way without question. The kind of man who had learned early in life that rules could be bent for men like him. She let him sit down, wait for his menu, take a sip of water. Then she approached. "Mr. Pierce?" she asked gently, tilting her head with a soft smile. He looked up, confused. She slid into the booth across from him before he could speak. "I won't take much of your time. I just need a moment. Then I'll leave you alone." Pierce squinted. "Do I know you?" "No," she said. "But you knew my father, Daniel Monroe." That was the first crack. His jaw shifted slightly. The glass in his hand paused in midair. "Who are you?" he asked, voice lower now. "I'm Evelyn Monroe," she said clearly. "His daughter." Pierce went pale. She watched it happen. His face, his body, the slight tremor in his hand. It was the reaction of a man who had buried something deep and just watched it claw back to the surface. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said quickly. "I think you do," Evelyn replied. She reached into her bag and placed a small recorder on the table. Clicked it on. He stared at it. She didn't blink. "I have copies of the journal," she said. "And letters, emails, bank records showing transfers to the family that took me in. Documents proving your signature on the medical papers that committed my mother without cause. I have enough to take this public. And I will." Pierce's jaw tightened. "I did what I had to do. I was trying to protect." "Protect who?" She cut in. "The company, your friends, yourself." He leaned back, his mouth a grim line. Evelyn's voice softened. "You took my family. You took my name. You made sure I disappeared so the people you served could grow richer and more powerful without anyone asking where the Monroe family went. And now I'm asking." He looked at her for a long time, and then, finally, he spoke. "It was never supposed to go that far." Evelyn stayed silent, letting him unravel. "Your father was stubborn," he continued. "He was sitting on something valuable, and he was going to take it public. But if he did, it would have blown up everything. Real estate contracts, illegal partnerships, names in politics." "You threatened him," Evelyn said quietly. "I warned him," Pierce snapped. "And then he died. And your mother, she wasn't stable. After he passed, she lost control. She made threats. Started calling journalists. She wasn't safe. She was grieving. She was dangerous." Evelyn leaned forward. "So you had her committed, and then paid people to disappear me?" Pierce said nothing. "Where is she?" Evelyn asked. He hesitated, then shook his head. "I don't know. After a few years, she vanished from the system. I was told she died." "You were told," she said sharply. "I didn't follow up. I didn't want to know. It was cleaner that way." The disgust on her face was clear. "You're a coward," she whispered. Pierce looked at the recorder. "What do you want from me?" "I already have what I need," Evelyn said, standing up. This was for me." She grabbed the recorder and walked out. She didn't look back. 2 days later, the story hit the news. Noah had made sure of it. He passed everything to the right journalists, people who still cared about corruption and cover-ups. Evelyn's voice played on the radio. Her story was printed in the Dallas Morning News. Photos of her father's journal, the records, the money trail, everything made public. Frederick Pierce was arrested within 48 hours. His lawyer released a statement calling it a tragic misunderstanding. But the public wasn't buying it. Evelyn Monroe became a name people whispered in elevators, shared in articles, tweeted in disbelief. Not just a florist. Not just a girl lost in the system. A survivor. A woman who took on giants and didn't flinch. But even as the headlines exploded and her face appeared on TV, Evelyn stayed quiet. The world finally saw her. But she was still searching. Her mother was still missing. And her story wasn't finished yet. The weeks that followed were a blur of headlines, interviews Evelyn refused, and phone calls she never returned. People offered money, documentaries, book deals. But she wasn't interested in being anyone's symbol. Not yet. Not while the most important part of her story remained missing. Her mother. The idea that Helena Monroe might still be alive haunted her. Every night she would lie awake, eyes open in the dark, listening to the wind through the bakery's broken window. She could almost hear her mother's voice in the breeze, humming the same lullaby Evelyn had carried in pieces since she was a child. It was Noah who found the lead. He called her early one morning, his voice calm but urgent. "There's something," he said. "I think I found her." He didn't say more until she arrived at his office, a glass high-rise overlooking the city, polished and spotless, worlds away from the crumbling flower cart and narrow bakery hallway that had once defined her life. He had a file waiting on the desk. No dramatic pauses. No speeches. Just facts. A private facility, registered under a fake name. The paperwork traced back to a closed network of mental health centers that specialized in off-the-books care, places where wealthy families or political players sent their problems to disappear. One patient had arrived 20 years earlier. No visitors. No outgoing calls. Paid in full for 2 decades by a shell company now linked to Frederick Pierce. Her name in the system, Helen Miller. No photos. No diagnosis on file. Just dates and payment logs. Evelyn knew instantly. "Where is it?" she asked. "A few hours north," Noah said. "Near Gainesville. Quiet place. Remote." She was already grabbing her bag. The building was white stone, hidden behind a long stretch of farmland. No signs. No gate. Just a path lined with birch trees and an intercom box by the door. When Evelyn walked in, her knees were weak, but her eyes were focused. The nurse at the front desk gave her a warm, confused smile. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for a patient," Evelyn said. "Helen Miller. I think she's my mother." The woman's smile faltered. "I'm sorry, we don't release information." Evelyn opened her bag and placed the folder on the counter. "This says otherwise." The nurse hesitated, then stood. "Wait here." Minutes passed. Evelyn tried not to look around. She didn't want to see the others, those lost like her mother, walking silent halls, waiting for a world that had moved on without them. When the nurse returned, she didn't say anything. She just nodded and led Evelyn down a corridor. The walls were soft green. There were no harsh lights. The quiet here was thicker than silence. It was weighted like memory. And then they stopped. Room 216. The nurse opened the door gently. Evelyn stepped inside. There was a woman seated by the window, a blanket over her legs, a cup of tea on the table. Her hair was long, silvered but clean. She wore a soft blue sweater and was humming, low, soft, almost to herself. The sound stopped Evelyn in place. She knew it. That melody. The one that had lived inside her for as long as she could remember. The woman turned. Her eyes were pale green, the same as Evelyn's, and for a moment she simply stared, as if trying to place the face in front of her. Then, the teacup fell from her hand, crashing to the floor. "Evelyn," she whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a remembering. Evelyn rushed forward, her arms shaking as she dropped to her knees in front of the chair. "It's me," she said, her voice cracking. "It's really me." Helena reached out slowly, as if afraid the vision might vanish if she touched it. Her hand met Evelyn's cheek, and she gasped. And then she wept. There were no words at first. Just sounds, tears, the kind of crying that came from years of silence, of not being allowed to scream when your child is stolen, when the world decides your mind doesn't matter, when your grief is labeled as madness. They held each other for what felt like a lifetime. Later, Evelyn would learn the rest. How Helena had been drugged, declared unstable by a court order signed in secret. How Pierce and his allies had falsified reports, paid doctors, made her disappear. How she had tried, in the early years, to escape. How she had eventually been medicated into silence. But nothing mattered more than this. The moment where mother and daughter, lost to each other for 2 decades, were finally one again. When Evelyn walked out of the facility that evening, her mother's hand in hers, the sky was pink and wide and quiet. And for the first time in 20 years, Evelyn Monroe didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, whole, alive. But there was one last thing left to do. The Monroe house stood silent in the early morning light, the windows glowing faintly in the sun like tired eyes just waking after a long, restless sleep. The ivy on the walls had been trimmed, the grass had been cut, and where the old rusted gate had once sagged open, a new arch now stood, made of wood and steel, engraved with a simple inscription: "For those who were lost, and those who never gave up looking." 3 months had passed since Evelyn brought Helena home. The first weeks were quiet, careful. Evelyn moved her mother into a guest room on the first floor, kept meals simple, routines slow, days light. She didn't ask about the hospital, didn't push for memories. She let them come naturally. Fragmented stories at first, soft recollections. A scent that reminded Helena of her garden. The feel of a certain sweater that made her cry. A song Evelyn hummed absent-mindedly that made Helena stop breathing for a few seconds, then laugh through tears. Every moment was both joy and heartbreak. Rebuilding took time, but they were doing it together. Noah visited often. He helped with the legal side, navigating courts, filing lawsuits, signing away power from those who had once profited off the Monroe name. Most of them folded quietly, afraid of the growing media storm around Evelyn's case. Frederick Pierce remained in jail, awaiting trial. And though the justice system never moved as quickly as it should, Evelyn no longer felt powerless, because she had something more important now. Control. Her name. Her family. Her voice. She didn't want to go back to being a florist on the corner. Not because she was ashamed, but because she had seen how many other girls still lived like she once did. Silent, invisible, forgotten by systems that failed them. So she decided to turn the Monroe house into something more. A sanctuary. A place for the others. It started with a small team. 2 counselors, 1 lawyer, a former caseworker who reached out after hearing her story on the radio. Then came donations, some anonymous, some from powerful names trying to make amends or save face. Evelyn didn't care why the money came, only that it helped. They named it the Evelyn Center. The rooms were painted warm colors. The garden was rebuilt, swing and all. In the kitchen, Helena taught the girls how to cook simple meals, laughing more often now, stronger every day. Evelyn watched from the porch sometimes, her heart aching in the best way possible. One afternoon, she planted daisies near the fountain. Next to them, she placed a small plaque. For those who survived in silence. It wasn't just a nod to her past. It was a promise. She didn't want fame. She didn't want interviews. She wanted change. Real, lasting, painful but honest change. And for the first time in her life, she believed it was possible. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting golden shadows across the front lawn, Noah sat beside her on the porch steps. "You know," he said quietly, "when I first met you, you were invisible. Not because you wanted to be. Because the world decided you didn't matter." Evelyn nodded, her gaze on the horizon. "And now?" he asked. She turned to him, her face calm, solid. "Now," she said, "I own the story." She stood, brushing her hands on her jeans. "Come on," she smiled. "There's still work to do." And as she walked back toward the house, toward the sound of laughter and the light in her mother's window, the wind carried the faint scent of gardenias. Not haunting anymore, but home. And if you like this story, you'll surely love the next one appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and turn on notifications. See you next time.